or don't like it. People have backed Saudi Arabia. What I really mind, though, is we back it at tremendous expense. We get nothing for it.
Well, that was Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump this morning laying out his strategy against the radical Islamic terrorists of ISIS. He says Saudi Arabia should be ponying up and paying us for all the support that we give the Desert Kingdom. He also outlined his overall foreign policy, one that he says involves the United States putting our troops on the ground in the fight against ISIS. Will that work? Ambassador John Bolton is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor who joins us this morning from San Francisco. Ambassador, he says that troops should go in, take the oil fields to choke the financial spigot that fuels ISIS. Will that succeed?
Well, I think there has to be a broader strategy. Certainly under President Obama, we have essentially no strategy at all. I do think the regional powers like Saudi Arabia, like Turkey, like the Arab monarchies generally, need to put more effort into it. But I think it's a mistake to think that without American leadership, they're going to be able to do it on their own. And while they certainly face an enormous threat from ISIS, it's not sufficient for us to say, let them work it out, it's their responsibility. We face a threat from ISIS. Western Europe faces a threat from ISIS. This is going to require American leadership to stop ISIS, whether we'd like to talk about it or not.
Well, Mr. Trump is not only critical of the Obama administration, but also Saudi Arabia. He says they make $1 billion a day, and we get nothing. And take a look at this. I mean, they have 227,000 troops, 600 tanks, 313 fighter jets. Their defense spending, number 3. The U.S. is at $581 billion, China $129 billion. Saudi Arabia, they're the number 3 at $80.8 billion. They're ahead of Putin's Russia. That's unbelievable. Why won't they step up and join this fight against the ISIS threat that's in their backyard?
Well, let's not forget, they bought a lot of that weaponry from us, and thank goodness for that. I think they're reluctant to do more against ISIS because they don't know what position the United States is going to take. They don't know what their risk might be. That's not to excuse them. It's to say that in the absence of American leadership, whether it's in the Middle East or in Eastern or Central Europe or in the Western Pacific, smaller nations, whatever their defense budget, don't know how to cope with these kinds of threats. This is what American leadership is all about, to protect our interests and those of our allies. And in the absence of an effective American leader, this is what you get.
Well, what would you say an effective American leader should do?
Well, I think the United States has to take the lead in dealing with ISIS. I think there's no blinking that reality. I think it's in our interest to see ISIS destroyed as soon as possible. I recall Winston Churchill's comments about the Russian Revolution. He said we should have strangled Bolshevism in its cradle. That's what we ought to be doing to ISIS right now. We're doing very nearly the opposite of that. It is going to take American boots on the ground. You can't blink that reality either. But more importantly, it requires American political decisiveness to pull together the Kurds, the Turks, the Saudis, the other Arabs, to be an effective opposition to ISIS.
Well, the president says they're going to train the rebels, like 5,000 a year. That should be enough.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. It goes along with the pitifully inadequate American airstrikes, the pathetic efforts to arm the so-called Syrian opposition, completely inadequate efforts to arm the Kurds, and very uncoordinated activity even with Turkey and certainly with the Arab oil-producing monarchies on the peninsula. I think it's clear to everybody that the United States under Obama doesn't know what it wants to do, and that's one reason that there's indecision on the ground in the region.
And finally, this morning on Meet the Press, he called you a tough cookie, said that he admires you. Any reaction?
Well, I think my record would show that unlike Barack Obama or John Kerry, I don't crumble in negotiations.
Well, the North Koreans have called you a bloodthirsty, fiendish bloodsucker and a very ugly fellow. So I guess being a tough cookie from Donald Trump is a bit better. Ambassador, always good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.